because they're like, "You never had a ticket." I'm like,
I've had several, and they still knocked off like. It's the charm.
What'd you say?
It's the charm. No me.
"Oh,
I
you've never had a ticket?"
I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. Let's be real. Tickets are like in our blood. We drive too fast. It's just known fact. You can go 90 and get away with it most places. No.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was going 88 in a 55.
See?
I should not have been doing that.
I was.
But I've never.
My
I
most
usually
recent ticket. My most recent ticket.
If you get over 80, they're gonna pull you.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened. And he pulled over two of us at the same time. Like I was like, he's a pro at this. He actually got both the lady behind me. We were like this. We were kind of like this. She was passing me, then I was passing her.
That was
one of those two. He got both of us. It was like, no.
He gave you both a ticket?
Yes, he did. I don't know how. Like,
They're only legally allowed to pull over one person at a time.
Right.
Well, the other guy stops.
She stopped too. I wouldn't have stopped.
Because
he was behind me.
if a police officer pulls over a group of motorcycles, they can only legally give out one ticket.
See, that's what I'm saying. That was her. I wasn't driving with her. She wasn't smart. That wasn't my fault. The ticket was only like $30 though. So I wasn't mad about it. Yeah, I wasn't mad about it.
Yeah, my ticket was $200.
Oh, I've had one of those before.
Yeah, but he knocked it down a lot. He was like, "You're gonna pay extra,"
I've had one of those before.
and you know.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get back into Mahler here.
Dr. Palmer, have you ever read The Restless Boys?
Yes, I have. The Alex Ross's book?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It has some interesting encounters with Mahler.
Yeah,
I really liked
it's
it.
been a while since I read it, but I love his writing, and
It was a really good read. I liked it.
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I'm trying to think if he has a history of is that the history of the 20th century? Or is that-
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the beginning of the 20th, or like a little bit before, so they talk about
Right.
Strauss and Mahler quite
Right.
a bit as well.
Yeah, that's a very good book. So let's talk about Mahler then. Many times Strauss and Mahler are seen as sort of competitors in this time, that they had very different worldviews, and yet their music is often equated with one another. They both were seen as being very modern, for sure. They both have a lot of common elements of their orchestral technique, and even some common strategies, I guess, in their music. And yet they are very different. Yeah. And they're very different in terms of their origins, maybe first of all, because Strauss was South German. He was born near Munich, and his father was a horn player in the Munich Opera Orchestra and the Munich Philharmonic. What's that? Franz Strauss was Richard's father and a great horn player. Which is one reason why he wrote the Horn Concerto and wrote maybe so many great horn parts. Because he appreciated his father. But so Strauss was kind of part of the aristocracy in a way. He wasn't himself an aristocrat, but being a sort of I don't know, I didn't really want to say ethnic German, but like a sort of wouldn't have been an Aryan exactly, but sort of somebody who was unquestionably German, of the higher class, right? And who had connections, with the musical aristocracy and so forth. And then Mahler was from Bohemia, meaning part of what's now Czech, the Czech Republic, and Mahler came from a lower class family. His father, I think, owned a distillery or a brewery or something like that. And Mahler, was Jewish. So that was another big element of his personality, which Strauss was Christian and he was an atheist really, but he was seen as Christian. So where Strauss was always kind of on the top of the world and was always celebrated as being sort of the best of German musical culture, Mahler had to really fight his way into that position. What?
You can see it in his music also, right?
Maybe you can see it in his music. I mean, the struggles that he has are more evident, perhaps, than Strauss. So Mahler ended up at the top of the orchestral world, but he was always considered suspect by various elements of the press. There are a number of caricatures of Mahler, for example, where he's depicted in anti-Semitic terms, as having a. I don't know if you're familiar with these kinds of caricatures, but let's just call some of them up.
Yeah.
This is one of the more famous ones. Side splitting is not necessarily the term that I would use, but there are certain aspects of that physical depiction which to a viewer of that time would have connoted Jewishness. He's got sort of a little bit of a stooped over appearance, his nose and his brow and his hair and so forth. These are part of those kind of caricatures. There's let's see, here's another one where Mahler is, let's see if that gives me, it's not very big, but I can make it bigger. Well, there's actually Strauss in that picture.
Yeah.
Strauss is doing something with that bell. I'm not exactly sure what. But this is sort of the general critique of modern music, period, right? You've got somebody playing the sewing machine. You see that?
Accurate.
You have
Anvil.
it looks like a chorus of animals over there on the right. You've got an elephant being played, I guess, by somebody in the back. I don't know what he's doing with that elephant.
You know what
He's
he's doing
blowing
with that.
it.
Is he pulling it?
Yes,
Yeah.
he's blowing into his butt.
Into his butt.
Oh, yes, he is.
Yeah.
And that explained that he was a modernist. He was a modernist.
Yeah.
The cows are singing.
The cannon, there's a cannon in the back.
Yeah, and,
What is going on in the very left?
Mahler himself is conducting with one of those noisemakers.
I love it.
And you've got a guy back here with an anvil.
And everybody with
Very
angry faces or like.
Necessarily.
Right, you've got
What is
Indians
that?
over here making war whoops or whatever.
Oh,
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
mean.
it's sort of equally offensive to lots of groups.
there's a
There's a
violin
dog
with two necks.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
You see the
Two
violin?
bridges.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Got two.
You see the dog singing?
Yes, I see.
Yeah.
It looks like a movie projector with a horn on it, or like recorded sound, sort of showing that, yeah.
I think it's interesting that the way they depict
Is that
it.
a
I think Strauss is
pig?
supposed to be kind of like
Yeah,
being lighthearted
It's
and
a wolf
joking
or a
in a way, and
Maybe.
I think that Mahler is looking down, like, because I just remember the reason I brought up the rest is noise because it explains both of their characters quite a bit
Yeah,
in that, and how Mahler was such a brooding person in
What's up
general.
with his hands here?
compared to Strauss,
No,
and
it's
they were
music
compared a lot,
is-
not only in their music but as
He's like,
people.
yeah,
But they are also really good friends.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that is how it's often, Mahler was depressed. Mahler was analyzed by Freud.
Yeah.
Mahler experienced, he experienced problems in his love life, like his
wife cheated on him.
wife cheated on him with,
But apparently that fixed their marriage.
he lost his children, two children to a fever. They died young.
Yeah, like,
he
his
himself
life
was,
was-
Dark
so,
life overall. It's like how
Yeah.
he depicted, and you can hear it in the symphonies too.
and he himself died young too. He had lots of premonitions about death, and he wrote about death a lot. Now Strauss did too, but I think this is supposed to be like his hands are whips, and they have
Whips.
whips of notes. Like he abuses people with his notes or something along those lines.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah.
National Mahler thoughts, like Mahler hammer thoughts.
Oh yeah. I love.
Oh,
Can't tell what
did
that
write
one
that.
says, but yeah.
There are really great videos on YouTube of people playing the hammer part in Mahler, like playing the hammer.
Like the trouble playing for instance.
Yeah, it's so funny.
I don't know. This is another famous portrait of Mahler that is supposed to, I think it's called a hyper-modern director. And it shows some of the gestures, probably in exaggerated form, but you know, it's trying to show you the motion, so that's why it seems like he has multiple arms and stuff. But you know, some of these gestures are just like, you know, really extroverted compared to Strauss. It was said when he was described as conducting, he was described as being very controlled, and all of his mannerisms were very precise, and he just had to do a little thing to get the orchestra to do what he wanted. He didn't have to do these histrionics, right? But the caricature of Jews at that time was that they were very histrionic and very uncontrolled in their emotions and very uncontrolled in their gestures and so forth. So this is partly what's at stake here with Mahler, you know, being very extroverted in his. Now, of course, you go to a orchestra concert today and you'd see half of these gestures because now orchestra conductors are almost more like interpretive dancers in front of the orchestra that sort of depict the music for the audience. You know?
Accurate.
But you know, this is part of the differences between the two of them in their personality and so forth.
That's that move toward modernism, though, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, something like this is showing different things. Some of these things are actually in Mahler symphonies, like
There's another canon, so the canon must be there.
1 through 17 horns, like that.
Accurate.
Yeah, over here.
1 through 7 trumpets. Is that trumpet?
Yeah.
Or trombone?
10 trombones and
10
2
trombones.
in some of these things, you know, showing some of his actual scores, but some of the sounds that he gets too, sounds of war and sounds of nature and sounds of bells and cuckoo. The cuckoo is in many of his pieces. Yeah.
I found the thing that I was talking about. That you know how he has a hammer blow in number 6, like the huge hammer blow. They're Classic FM. I don't know if you know what ClassicFM.com is. They have an article based on like a bunch of video, like mini videos of the hammer blow, and like it has captions of each one.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, that would be fun. Yeah. So those are some differences between the two of them, and yet there are certain similarities. I mean, they both were writing for giant orchestras. They both were they both were trying to capture a lot of meaning in their pieces. They both were influenced by Nietzsche. So there are a lot of similarities in what they did. One of the vexed topics with Mahler is the issue of the program. And was he using a program or was he not using a program, right? He's one of the composers who sometimes you can't tell what the game is that you're supposed to be playing. So if Strauss is very clear about it, this is a symphonic poem based on, and in fact, Strauss got rid of the word symphonic poem and started using tone poem because he didn't want the implications that this should be a symphony. But you know, this is a tone poem on Don Juan. Mahler sometimes will have a symphony that's just called symphony, but if you start to look at it a little more closely, you'll find out that at one point it had a program, and then he withdrew the program, but then he put the program back, then he might have even withdrawn it again. You know, so he was not always sure whether he wanted to play that game with the audience where he gave them a program and told them what the paratext was and what they should do about it, right? So that's one of the things that makes Mahler sometimes challenging to interpret.
The other thing I think was interesting is that he changed the name too. He would have a program and then he had a name and a title, then he took it away and then he changed it to something completely different.
Yeah.
So he was hearing it differently, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that he completely shifted a program from one thing to something completely different. He may, I don't know. What's the example?
Well, like what the cuckoo tells me changed it into what the angels tell me.
Oh,
and
yeah.
What night tells me turns into what man tells me.
Yeah.
What the flowers tell me, what the rocks tell me. I mean, they change to different visual
Different
images.
elements of nature. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
this the similar idea, but yeah, it does seem what the rocks would tell me. It seems quite different than what the flowers would tell me.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Carolyn.
Is Mahler stuff kind of moving towards like avant-garde? Because I was kind of trying to differentiate between modernism and the avant-garde movement too.
Right. So Mahler's another one of those. He's a little bit tricky in that way. Some people, I mean, he's obviously included in the modern chapter of this book, And in 1895, when these pieces are being played, people do perceive them as very modern, in part because of just having a giant orchestra on the stage and sort of going against conventions, about symphonies and how symphonies are supposed to be put together. It's very clear that he's not just trying to write an absolute music piece like Brahms, for example, right? So it's clear that he has some allegiance to the future. But on the other hand, his pieces also have deep roots in the past, and some of them have a lot of historic aspects to them. Sometimes they're like, have the sound of an earlier style. Sometimes they'll do that.
Because I kind of consider like avant-garde just like totally different. Like there's no nod to the past at all.
Yeah.
So I guess it wouldn't totally be there yet.
Well, he wrote his last, he died in 1911. So in 1911, Arnold Schoenberg, who would have been the real avant-garde at the time, he was writing atonal music at that time. He's writing Pierre Lunaire, So if you know Pierre Lunaire, comparing that to Mahler's symphony is, very, very different. Yeah. So, so it's not exactly right to say he wasn't modern, but he was modern, but he was modern in a certain way for his time, if that makes sense. Yeah. And he wasn't as modern as some other people were. So I think people tend to include him more like as a last echo of Romanticism than a first echo of modernism, perhaps. But he does have that too, yeah.
What I find interesting specifically about Mahler and his music is that it's literally, I don't know if it's supposed to be, but it's supposed to, from what I've gathered, it's like just straight up emotion compared to anything else. I remember reading at some point that he would like to go to his summer house to compose, and that he wanted to be in complete solitude so that he could put his emotions onto paper. And even when he wrote things to Alma, his wife, he, instead of writing letters, he would literally write like a manuscript, and she would understand what he was saying and things like that.
I hadn't heard that.
Specifically, I just looked up the story because I remember reading about it, but the story was that his declaration of love to Alma was, instead of a letter, he coded it in his manuscript without a word of explanation. So she understood and replied he should come. And apparently that story was heard from both of them. So it's a good, he has been even when I listened to his symphonies, the first time I've ever listened to one of his symphonies, it was number 6. I cried, and I don't cry with anything. And it's kind of weird how that game works with him. I feel like it's not necessarily programmatic or absolute in a way, because it's more human. And I feel like that's where modernism comes in his music. He's tapped into something completely different. So that no one else is exploring.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that in the sense that it's with Mahler, I think you can just sort of follow the emotional journey of the work.
Yeah.
And there's not necessarily a big narrative or something that you're supposed to, where there is often with Strauss kind of a narrative about what's happening, with Don Juan. There isn't that same sense with Mahler.
Yeah, I definitely think that. I feel like the emotion is the subtext, or what is driving the piece. At least that's, and what your interpretation or your feeling is, I feel like that's the game. Because that's what Mahler was obsessed with, was memorializing his emotions into music.
Now, I would say that there are a lot of philosophical ideas in Mahler too.
Oh yeah.
So, I do think that there's a lot of ideas about Nietzsche and the world and heaven, and does heaven exist, and is heaven real, and is heaven just a child's dream? The Fourth Symphony, for example, the final movement is supposed to take place in heaven, but it's a very childlike poem, and there are just bizarre things in the poetry where they talk about the angels in heaven are having a game where they're going to butcher a lamb, or things like that, and things that you wouldn't necessarily expect about heaven, I guess, and it leads you to a very different place of thinking, is this heaven real? Is this heaven illusory? That kind of thing. Having a movement, one movement that's based on, in this piece, in the Symphony No. 3, Let's see. If we just look through the movements of this piece, movement 4 has a poem from Nietzsche, from Thus Spake Zarathustra. And that book is all about getting over religion. The whole point of Thus Spake Zarathustra, Zarathustra is a pilgrim who figures out that religion is illusory, and yet he's very drawn to it. You know, he describes it as a sickness that he has. He has a sickness of longing for religion that he has to recover from in the course of this book. And so, you know, it's a very philosophical text. You know, when you read this, it's not entirely clear what it's supposed to mean, but it's certainly hard to reconcile with, say, a Christian worldview. Whereas then the next movement is what the angels tell me. You know, and again, it's this kind of childlike perception.
It's kind of weird.
There's some strange details in here too. And it's sung by a children's choir. You know, and it has sleigh bells and other things like that. You know, so it's not all entirely clear what this is supposed to mean.
I thought it was interesting because, like, you know how, like, in the 19th century idealism and, you know, just that it's all about, like, transcendence and
Yes.
all that stuff. Like, I feel like this is, like, a depiction of that, like, sort of ideal of
Yeah.
the 19th century. And at the same time, like, the fact that it's childlike, it's kind of like being reborn. At least, like, that's how I've interpreted it. I kind of see it as, like, he's basically transporting you, like, or, like, taking you to a different sort of existence through his music.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, when it's childlike and stuff, it's not necessarily strange or surprising because it's his idea, or what I think is his idea of rebirth.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe one of the differences between Mahler's view of the world and, like, that early romantic view of the world, when they had their transcendence, they usually believed in it.
Yeah.
You know, whereas Mahler's transcendence is always kind of under a question mark.
Right.
You're never quite sure if he means it, or if in the next movement we're going to go back to something else. You know, he doesn't ever have a piece. The closest is the Second Symphony, where it's just an unabashedly positive ending, and it's, you know, just glorious and everybody's excited. That's the Resurrection Symphony, and you know, there it does have a text that it seems to be very much like the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven, where we get to the heavens and all is good. But like this piece, it's always alternating between these ideas. So if we look at this first movement in this piece, there are a couple of contrasting things that alternate. And these two ideas, he kind of goes back and forth between them through the course of this 30-minute long movement. And it's never sure which one of them is going to win, right? Just as soon as we get comfortable with sort of one of them, the other one intrudes. Yeah. I think I have Bacchus in the wrong place, or I think this would just be Pan. And then Bacchus is representing the second kind of idea. At least that's how the program notes here describe it. But essentially, there's the two ideas in this are kind of equivalent to nature and maybe like humanity. And there's the conflict between the two ideas. Nature is sublime, right? We looked at the picture of Niagara last week, and how Niagara is this just incredible force that we can't comprehend, and it does what it wants. If you get in the barrel and you get in the river you're going over, you're probably going to die, right? Nature is like that. And the first part of this piece is that idea of nature, the idea of nature as power, as nature as this unstoppable force, this primeval thing. And then the second idea is it's represented by this kind of march, almost like a military march, and sometimes it's, I guess, associated with Bacchus. Who's Bacchus?
God of wine.
God of wine, Roman god of wine, god of partying, god of disorder, but sort of human aspects, I guess. And he seems to be leading you out of this frightening nature and into some kind of happy ending. But every time he does that, it sort of falls apart, and you end up back in the world of Pan, right? So let me just play a little bit of this piece. And we'll hear one of those processes. So I'm going to pull this up, and then I'm going to switch from my microphone to the. Sorry. Yeah. I don't know why this always sounds so bad. Let me try something else.
Myself in a bad way.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you see how that he stages this conflict, and then he does it several times. So each time the conflict kind of gets a little bit more fraught. So like the second theme, this human area, well, the next time we hear it, it's going to be a little bit longer, and it's going to go a little further, and it's going to seem like it's going to get to its triumphant end when all of a sudden we have the return of that nature theme, right? And then it happens again later on during the development, and toward the end of the development, it seems like it's going to, that's going to be the triumphant conclusion. But then the recapitulation comes, and we go back to Pan again, and then eventually it seems like we're going to get there at the very end, and then finally it makes it to the end of the movement in that kind of human space. So this, these kind of conflicts, this is the kind of thing that Mahler likes to stage in his symphonies. And then he also has this concept, which I think Hapikowski talks about, but the concept of breakthrough, where you have all of a sudden a very surprising thing happen, where it seems like the meaning has just shifted very suddenly from one thing to the next. So you're going along on a certain track, and then all of a sudden it's like they throw the track and you're on another track going somewhere different because of the way that the thing is moving, right? And Mahler loves to do that, where you're getting to some place, and then all of a sudden there's just this explosion in the music. Let's hear just that part. I'll play right around 13 minutes as we're getting toward the end of this exposition, and we're hearing this second theme get really wound up and start to sound like it's going to be a winner, but then it gives way again. So stop that for a second. And it's just catastrophic all of a sudden. And that, especially that motive, the one in the muted trumpet. That one, right? And he just sits on that dissonant seventh for the longest time while the other, instruments are playing, and then maybe he finally resolves it. But getting there. I mean, that's one of the ways in which he is more modern. I mean, he uses those dissonances. But he uses them meaningfully, whereas, Schoenberg was trying to get away from having dissonance have a special meaning. So, but anyway, that's the kind of thing that he stages. That's what makes his symphonies, I think, so dramatic and so exciting. Are those moments of breakthrough, or moments, you know, where all of a sudden it just shifts, and you know, you get this other thing. But he also can do very, very different kinds of tone at the same time. You know, you compare that this hugely dynamic first movement with the second movement, and you know, they are enormously contrasting. Where you know, you've got something that sounds completely innocuous in a way. And let's see if I could. I guess they don't have this separated by movements in this recording, but that's it right there. Just play a bit of the second movement as a contrast here. Yeah, those big string sounds are so gorgeous, aren't they? Just that pillow of strings. You know, you have 20 or 30 violins playing something like that. It's just totally wonderful. Yeah, so completely different from the first movement. The third movement is indicative of one of Mahler's big tendencies. And if you know his output, he basically wrote two kinds of pieces. He wrote symphonies and he wrote songs. And sometimes it's actually kind of, he mixes the two together. In fact, in many cases, he mixes the two together because he uses songs as the basis of symphony movements, and he also writes symphonic songs. So some of his songs were for piano, but most of them were for orchestra. And this is an example, especially in the first four symphonies, he uses songs from this large group of songs he had composed called the Des Knaben Wunderhorn, the boy's magic horn, or the boy's cornucopia. You know what a cornucopia is?
Yes.
What is a cornucopia?
Thanksgiving, it's a
Yeah.
basket. It's a basket.
Yeah. Right, yeah, it's a cone-shaped basket that's usually spilling out food, and it's a representation of like having a lot, having plenty of food to eat, or plenty of good things. So the Des Knaben Wunderhorn was a set of poetry that was collected by a couple of scholars in the 19th century and published as like this anthology of German folk poetry. So Mahler went back to it time and time again because he loved the simplicity of these poems. So this one that he based this on, Ablösung im Sommer, or Relief of the Summer Guard. Just to give you an example of that. Translation of what I actually use. here's the song, and it's about it's a very cute little song about how the cuckoo is being replaced by the nightingale. So it's like a fanciful sort of poem when you're talking about the birds doing. It's very kind of innocent sort of poem, and it has the cuckoo sound. All through it, it has a little motive. Bum 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 is used throughout it. So here's his song, "Change in the Summer Garden."
Hat sich zu Tode gefallen an einer grünen Weiden. Kuckuck ist tot, hat sich zu Tod gefallen. Wer soll uns denn den Sommer lang die Zeit und Wein vertreiben? Wer soll uns denn den Sommer lang die Zeit und Wein vertreiben? Eine Volk- und Frau-Nachtigall, die sitzt auf grünem Zweige, die kleine feine Nachtigall. Sie singt und singt bis bald Tag noch, wenn andere Vögel schweigen. Wir warten auf Frau Nachtigall, die wohnt im grünen Hage. Und wenn der Kuckuck zu Ende ist, dann fängt sie an zu schlafen.
It's a perfect text for Mahler, because it's very sweet and very innocent, except not completely.
No,
What about it is not maybe so sweet and innocent?
the bird is dead.
Yeah, the bird is dead.
The cuckoo is dead.
The words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was shocked. Like, what?
Cuckoo is told. Cuckoo is told. Yeah, it's there's a certain amount of in these poems. There's innocence and also a certain kind of callousness, which kids are kind of like that sometimes. Like kids can be, very cruel at the same time that they're being very sweet because they don't know to phrase things in euphemisms. Or,
Callousness is like careless.
Callousness
In a
is like
funny way.
they just don't care. They don't know, like when you, for example, if a child finds out that maybe another child's parent has died or something like that, they might just go up to the kid and say, "Oh, I heard your mom died."
Yeah.
Right, because they don't know that you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And there's that kind of thing in these poems too. These Wunderhorn poems that they're both innocent and part of that innocence is like a little bit of cruelty. And this is an example of that. So it's like this lighthearted poem, except, it does talk about life moving on and so forth. And, he bases the symphonic movement on that. So it's literally just kind of a redo of that movement. Here's the symphonic treatment of it. It's bittersweet, isn't it? Sometimes it sounds really innocent and light, and you have these beautiful woodwind parts going, and then all of a sudden the brass will come in and be very dark and very sour almost, and that sums up a lot of what Mahler does. It gives you this feeling of being, happy and sad at the same time, or not knowing which to be, or happy. And I think that's one of the really rare things that he's able to do. The music itself is not particularly revolutionary, but the feelings that he presents are. Maybe this is what you were saying. So it's a modern way of looking at the world, perhaps. Idealistic, but also tragic. Oh, let's see. Is there anything else we wanted to say about Mahler? Yeah. Did anybody listen to any of the other movements of the work? Did you find any of them particularly stunning? Number 4, the one with the voice.
Yes.
Yeah, that one is pretty. The tone there about oh Mensch, it's a very strange texture. It's an otherworldly kind of texture, isn't it? Very slow and just the soprano, or it's an alto, and the alto sounds like some kind of oracle from on high singing this text, which is very portentous, but not exactly sure what it means. Oh man, take heed. What says the deep midnight? Does deep midnight talk to you? Because if it does, I would suggest some medication. I slept. From a deep dream have I awoken. The world is deep and deeper than the day has thought. Okay, what does the day think about? The day has thoughts? I don't know. Deep is its pain. The world's pain, I guess. Joy, deeper still than heartache. Pain says, pass away. But all joy seeks eternity, seeks deep, deep eternity. It sounds very deep. I don't know if it means anything, but it sounds very deep. Yeah. Ewigkeit is one of Mahler's favorite words, and has that word a lot. Ewig.
The singer was very it was very dark.
Yeah.
Dark sound.
You have to find a massive dark alto to sing this part. What is life makes Zarathustra feel ashamed of his anguish and doubts, and bids him meditate between the 12 strokes of midnight on the secret of the worlds, their profound pain and even more mysterious joy, etc., yearning for eternity. So there's a lot going on there, but I'm not sure exactly what it means. And then you have this, again, a very innocent movement with the sleigh bells and the angels, and yet that's got, even in heaven, it's got bitter weeping and so forth. And then this last movement, I guess, is supposed to wrap this all up with a sort of tranquility. It does quote the first movement and tries to sort of show how that's been tamed and changed around. So he does, try and maybe resolve this in a passive, a more placid way, I guess. But anyway, what other questions do you have about Mahler? Any questions you have about Mahler? Do you find him interesting?
Oh,
You like his music?
very much.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been hugely popular in the orchestra hall for quite a while now. I mean, he was pretty much forgotten because the Germans wouldn't play his music during the Nazi time, of course. And for a time, it was thought that his music was just very old-fashioned. And then in the 50s and 60s, it was revived primarily by Leonard Bernstein. He was one of the big proponents of Mahler and recorded all the symphonies with the New York Philharmonic and played them a lot. And it really caught on with audiences. In some ways, it was an alternative to the more spiky kind of modernism that was in fashion in the 1960s. So where people were kind of turning their back on like 12-tone music and serialism and randomness and John Cage and all of that.
Yeah.
At that same time, symphonic audiences were discovering Mahler, and it was like this new music, but from an era when people really liked the sound. So Mahler kind of came back at a very fortuitous time. And then also I think his Jewishness, which had always been a problem for him, now was kind of a plus in the sense that, we could see him as this victim of anti-Semitism and see his music as a symbol of the Holocaust to some extent and the tragedy that, had befallen Europe's Jews. So that probably didn't hurt his music either, but it's really never gone out of vogue since then, and it's still like it's the pinnacle of the PSO season. Every year they play a big Mahler symphony in June, right before they call it quits for the year, and the Vienna Philharmonic, they play Mahler regularly, and it's always a big audience pleaser. So they're a tremendous thrill ride to sit through one of these Mahler symphonies, even though sometimes they're 90 minutes long. And they really test your concentration in a way.
It's worth it.
But it is worth it. So anyway, all right. Well, I think that's all I have to say for tonight. I think everybody's clear on what we're doing next week, I hope.
Yeah.
How about papers? Are there any issues that people are having with their paper that they want to bring up? Everybody feels confident. I'm not sure I saw everybody's bibliography, so I hope that I will. If I haven't seen it, I hope I will see it soon. Or if you need any help, that you'll come to me this week before things get going next week with presentations, and I'll do what I can to help you. But yeah, so nobody's in dire panic.
Mm-hmm.
If my question is somebody doing the same subject you're working on?
Don't worry about that.
Okay.
Not concerned about that.
Cool.
You just may have to fight them for the books.
It's okay.
But if you're having a problem, if you're finding that the books you need are checked out, then let me know,
That's okay.
and we can figure out how to deal with that. But all right. Well,
Are you doing
I
specific pieces?
will arrange. We didn't quite get enough people for next
Let's do
week
next
to
week.
present.
Right?
So let me just review this again. So Julianne, Jess, Janet, Alex, Justin, and Nashwan are going next week. And I don't know if everybody, I guess everybody was on when Laura, you weren't on maybe when we talked about that. Do you have any desire to present next week rather than the week after?
Both are not ideal because it's concert week for me. So
Okay.
doesn't really matter because neither one is good.
All right. Well, can you go ahead and do next week then?
I will do my best to get it done.
Okay. And as we were talking before, what I sort of expect is that the research will be mostly done. You'll have conclusions. You'll have a basic idea of what your points are going to be. But if it's not completely finished, that's okay. So it doesn't need to be written by next week, for example. Like you could have a good solid outline, and have your main points and your examples picked out. But if it's not fully written by next week, that's certainly okay.
Alright, we'll see what magic I can work this week.
All right, I appreciate it. Okay, well, I'll see you next week then.
Thank you very much.